Hi everybody, good evening, welcome to the show. Thanks for being patient while make sure everyone found their seats. The show's sold out, which I'm pleased to report. So my name is Jake, I'm the programmer here. I'm a friend of Milton's, but only became a friend of Milton's about 10 years ago because of how much I loved this film. We're showing this because it's the 50th anniversary, just sort of extraordinary. And I don't want to say too much, but I just want to say that that's no small feat that we're selling out a show of a film that was made 50 years ago. A film that was by Milton with a small crew and with extraordinary performances by Rip Torn, Sally Kirkland, and Vivica Lindfors. And I don't know how much everyone knows about the history of this film, but it was a film that was very divisive upon its release, to say it politely, and a film that then was not seen for a very long time, underappreciated and nearly forgotten. I think Milton would just say it actually fell into oblivion. And then about 2 decades ago had a bit of a reappraisal, and now again 20 years after that is still playing to full houses. I don't know I can't imagine what it's like to make it work 50 years ago, and to think that, imagine that 50 years later. I mean, Milton will tell you in a second exactly how it feels. But I just wanted to take a moment and just say, think of all the films that have been made in the history of cinema and how many of them were huge deals at the time that we now never think about. And this film, which was perhaps not seen by enough people at the time, continues to endure. It's, I think, one of the great American films ever made. So I'm really pleased to be able to present it. And with that, the architect of the film, director Milton Moses Ginsburg.
I know you're all thinking, how did this young guy make a film 50 years ago? We'll discuss time travel during the Q&A. 50 years, give or take maybe 20 minutes, 50 years ago, I go down to the theater where the film has just opened and shown twice. And I go, and people are coming out, and I go over to this guy. It's an X-rated film. It's already very controversial. And I say, hey, buddy, how's the film? And he comes and he says to me, piece of shit, don't waste your money. Here's my focus group. Couple come out. And I say, how was the film? And the guy says, this is the greatest film I've ever seen in my life. It's a masterpiece. And his girlfriend says, we just sat through it twice. I said, that's it, I'm out of here. Anyway, you see which side you fall on. We'll discuss it in a couple of hours. I want to thank Jake, because Jake has, in a way, been the godfather of this film for the past decade. He's gotten it shown around town. They've shown it here at the Metrograph. Thank you, Jake. I'll see you all later. I'm certainly open for questions. I'd like to make some statements first. I want to talk about the performances. None of the film was improvised. Everything is scripted, maybe 3 or 4 lines have changes. I didn't expect that would be the case. I told my actors, principally Rip and Sally and Vivica, I said, look, if you want to throw out the lines and you can hit the beats, the emotional beats, and move the story along, that's fine. I'm after authenticity. And Sally says, forget that. These are the lines. There's improvisation between the lines, for sure. These are the lines. And Sally shows me her script. It's, I know what the script looks like. I distributed them. Sally's script looks like the Talmud, in that On every page, there's a lot of space around the script normally. On every page, she has the backs, the sides, the top and bottom filled in with various colors and statements. This was going to trigger this line. Pure method, purest method. I mean, you'd never know that from looking at her performance. This is what's going to trigger this line. And I said, look, Sally, there was no salary. For sure, there was no salary. 3 weeks, 50 grand was the budget. I say, look, Sally, I know you're going to be doing your work. Method, the studio, the work. I said, but after you trigger your line the way you want to trigger it, let your work go. And then start up and do your work for the next line. I'm not sure what I was telling her, but she heard it. And years later she would say, Milton was trying to achieve real time. Now let me tell you about Rip's method. Rip, I personally think you've seen one of the greatest, whatever you think of the film, you've seen one of the greatest performances by an actor I have ever seen in my life. Rip was purely visceral. He was not going to do method exercises. Afterwards, people came over to me and said, hey, you found an actor just like you. I said, no, I didn't. Rip is nothing like me. He channeled me. He needed a Jewish psychiatrist, a Jewish intellectual. I was in the room. He built his performance on that. I say nothing is improvised. When Rip gives his speech, when the camera's breaking down while he's trying to talk, I wrote a 10-minute monologue, my great existential statement, and Rip did it perfectly. And then I looked at the rushes, did several takes. I looked at the rushes, and I realized that my damn lines were interfering with his performance. That was the improvisation. His soul was there. So what I did was, I devised this, wasn't a gimmick because it works. I had the camera, I put in the flash frames, I had and the sound. I had the camera breaking down while he was breaking down. And he's so expressive, he didn't need the lines. That's the kind of acting we got across the board. Kurosawa has said, somebody asked Kurosawa, how do you direct? And Kurosawa said, the actors pick up a tone from me. Oh, well, you know, I believe it. The actors, Rip picked up a tone from me and used it. I must say, two of Rip's sons, Rip's two sons, John and Tony are here in the audience. It's a pleasure to have you. So that's pretty, anyway, we're open, I'm open. Jake is not here to protect any of us. Questions? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about just the filming process? You'd set up this mirror box that he had. I mean, so actually, what was the film? What was a day of filming like on this movie? What was it?
Great question, because I. Thank you. Great question. Rip is a very difficult actor. Sally's very difficult, very crazy.
Yeah.
12-hour days, 6 days a week. Because I needed the 7th to rest. That's the kind of schedule we had. 3 weeks, we made a film for $50,000. And it looked like that. You'd never know that from the performances. The philosophy behind it, Chelsea Girls is in there somewhere. David Holtzman's diary, if you know the
I
film,
do.
is definitely in there somewhere. A thing I call Euro-modernism is in there. Antonioni, Ermanno Olmi, The Fiancés, brilliant, brilliant film. Last year at Marienbad, Alan Renee, they're all in there. But what I don't acknowledge, or I never did acknowledge until recently, is that my life is in there. I lived every one of those scenes. I fictionalized them, but I remembered them verbatim from my life, that I was trying to deal with my promiscuity. And I was seeing a psychiatrist at the time, but I was also running around in East Hampton, fashionable in the 60s, with a group of psychiatrists who were as fucked up as I was. That's where the film came from. The workday, everybody would come in. All the lighting was set on the first day. Every scene has a different, the camera's moved, the optic is changed in the camera, the lighting is a little different, depending upon what the choreography of the action was going to be. But on the first day, we lit every scene, basically. The lights in the ceiling, lights on one wall, studio apartment. Everything in this one studio apartment. Lights on one wall, lights on the ceiling, and on any given day, and my cameraman, can't even talk about my cameraman. I will in a second. So I'd come in on any morning and say, look, three, I'd say that one, and that one. He'd say, okay, 3, 4, and 9. I'd say, yeah, Jack, 3, 4, and 9. Jack was a graduate of Auschwitz.
Okay.
Then we'd begin rehearsal. And these were takes between 5 and 10 minutes, because if you were keeping a diary, you couldn't turn the camera on and off in front of the people who were there. The conceit was the psychiatrist, Rip, had a switch on the side, and he set the camera in motion. We're looking at his dailies. These are the psychiatrist's dailies, so to speak. So we begin to rehearse. Casting. Several agents service the film. We get this young woman to play the girl with the baby carriage, young woman with the baby carriage. And several accomplished actresses came in, and this young woman with the baby carriage was starting her career. She sticks her head in the door, and she says, "Hi, is this the place?" and starts to giggle. I turned to the producers. I said, "She's it." They said, "What, are you out of your fucking mind?" She's it. Anyway, start of the day. Generally, we did 2 of the scenes a day. One in the morning, the one in the evening were all the night scenes, so to speak. The one in the morning were the day scenes. 2 scenes a day. We'd start rehearsal for the 5 and 10 minute takes, and after about an hour, I'd say to Jack, "We're still rehearsing, Jack. run the camera. And I'd say to the cast, all right, let's go through it, beginning to end. Don't worry about mistakes. Let's see what we got. I think 2 or 3 of the scenes in the movie were the last rehearsal, so to speak.
And was the camera literally in that mirror box at all times? Or?
Before I wrote the script, I drew a picture. A sofa under a mirror. I knew I was going to use a mirror, because the mirror would give me the only recourse to what you call mise en scène. In other words, there would be no variety without the mirror. If someone was sitting in front of it, it would be close-up. Across the room, at least you'd have a medium shot. And I didn't realize the great thing about it is 2 people would be facing the camera while they talked to one another. You'd see both their faces. Person in the foreground, unless she invariably was sitting on the sofa with Rip, or the person opposite the mirror. The mirrored box was I needed something to put the camera in so that people wouldn't know, you know, again, the conceit that there was a camera there. And it just continued the metaphor of, and he's called Glassman, Dr. Glassman. That I knew before I started writing the script. The genesis of the script was I'd written my first 2 screenplays. I went to these producers, they optioned the first. With the option money on the first, I wrote the second. I brought it down to their office. By the time I got home, the phone rang. They had optioned the second. They called up, we want the second. After about 2 months, they said, look, you've locked yourself in as the director in these things. If you want, you know, if that's your only if that's your condition, we're never going to get anything made. I said, all right, let's shoot a couple of scenes. And one of the producers, a guy named Dan Davis, said, okay, how much you need to do some scenes? My mind was already working. I said 20,000. He says 20,000 to shoot a couple of scenes? I said, yeah, but if you double it, I'll make a whole movie. He said, how are you going to do that? I said, well, I'll do it all in one room. Excuse me. I'll do it all in one room. We had already cast Rip for for an earlier film. I said, I'll go back to Rip, see if he wants to do this. And that's how it began to get made. Then I devised the mirror scheme and the diary form, and that's how it went. So we'd rehearse in the morning, shoot midday, rehearse in the early afternoon, shoot in the evening.
Great. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What should we surmise from the last scene where it's just the girl going nuts and you see a gun and you don't see a ring?
Okay. I was talking about sources of the film. I missed one. I used to hang out at a place called Max's Kansas City. Most of you have been there. You look fairly, not quite as contemporary, but many of you might know it. Max's Kansas City. And Andy used to hang out. Andy Warhol hung out in Max's Kansas City. I'm glad tonight he's giving me my 15th minute. Warhol used to hang out in Max's Kansas City, and I was stunned when he was shot by Valerie Solanas. I mean, he was another filmmaker. I was a little misguided. I didn't consider him much of an artist, but I did consider him another filmmaker, and he was shot by this woman. And then I'd see him afterwards. A couple of months later, he came out of the hospital, a different person. White, pale, and it had an impact on me. So the girl at the end, the ex-patient, is waiting to kill Rip when she discovers his setup. Not quite sure what it is, but she breaks it up, and then she continues. Then who knows what happens after that mirror comes down. Yeah.
I appreciate you telling that. I don't even think you needed to tell that. I thought it was an amazing film, but I could tell like it was something about like your inner self. How did this film affect you when it first released 50 years ago, and how does it affect you now, like after filming it and like seeing it so many times?
I don't think I've truly seen the film in 20 years at least. And how it affected me afterwards, I was not in touch with my, I mean, I was in touch with the source, you know, Antonioni and Renee. I didn't say to myself, this film was about you. That came to me a bit later. And also, I was disappointed. I'd made the film I wanted to make, and some of the reviews were virulent. Some of them were quite extraordinary, positive. Siskel, Gene Siskel wrote a review that I didn't see until about 10 years ago, where in the review he says, if you have not known despair and suicide, this film will be lost on you. Well, that shook me up. You know, that he was acknowledging something. Screw Magazine gave me a review to die for, except it was Screw Magazine. God, the reviewer said, if you want to have no regrets about ever having lived, see this movie. I mean, that's quite a nice review. Psychiatric Times gave me a review invoking Aristotle. Aristotle's theory of tragedy and how this film fulfilled that. Well, when you get a good review from Aristotle, it gives you a lift. But the personal connection I couldn't tolerate the personal connection.
This is one of the best movies I've seen in years and years, probably,
Wow.
I have to say.
Thank you.
You're well, no, thank you. And I have a really silly comment maybe to you, but
Please.
it was such a tragic portrayal of suicide and breaking down, but I couldn't help but think of the Nichols and May psychiatrist bit. And this whole, the tragedy and the comedy
Yes.
of despair.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
Anyway.
Yeah. Question?
Thank you for your film. I have to say I found many scenes quite problematic from a female point of view, and I think it's the movie caters to most of male fantasies, and it's quite flat or there's not enough variety. And I would like to know if women or female critics also back then when you showed it, if they reacted very differently, and even or today, what would
Great comment.
I think it's
Well, I was running in a circle, so to speak. I had my crowd when I made the film, these East Hampton people. Most of the people I knew were painters. We hung out at Max's, before that the Old Cedar Bar. Male painters, women painters. The women I knew liked the film very much because it revealed the guys. It revealed male psychology. I mean, I get that comment a lot. They love the film because, oh, this is what our guys are like. And they were. And we were and I was. But what the film is about, it's sexist, but it's about sexism. It's about the psychology of sexism. It's about the world I lived in as accurately as I could portray it from a man's point of view.
I would like to see him breaking down instead of her kind of going insane in the end. I don't see enough vulnerability.
Are you willing to give me the budget for that one? I'll do it. But I understand your feeling about it. But for me, it is about sexism. It's about erotic greed. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the movie. At the time when the movie was made, there were like a lot of ideas about sex, like percolating in the culture, like freeing yourself, of channeling your mortality, or dealing with it, or working it out. And in this movie, sex is like a lot more deadening, and it's a lot like less sexy, and like it's not a way of working out your mortality. It's a way of making it even more like knotty and like clumped and more like difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
So were you like aware of like dealing with those like the way that sex was appearing in the culture and high culture and stuff?
And myself.
Yourself.
What my attitudes were. Also another element, and I have to say this, at the time, as I talked about David Holtzman's diary, the year before there was the efflorescence of hardcore on 42nd Street. And I saw one of those movies and I said, oh my God, I don't believe this. These guys are showing what we look like when we're doing it. I was stunned by that. I wanted my film to have some of that shock value. But the turmoil and the promiscuity, I knew I was paying a price. And I lived like that after the film. Someone asked me earlier, how did it affect me? I lived like that another 10 years. Look, I want to tell you something. One of the most interesting questions, and some shocking questions, anybody ever asked me during the Q&A about this film, I don't know where it was, could have been Europe, maybe Boston. A person said at the end of the session, he said, you know, and I probably had mentioned I was seeing a psychiatrist during the Q&A, and I was running around with psychiatrists. He said, would you recommend psychoanalysis? Asking me. And I knew I didn't know where it was coming from, but it was not frivolous. But my answer may have been frivolous. I said, look, Freud said there were two cures for severe neuroses. One was extensive psychoanalysis. This is Freud. The other was falling in love. I said, if I had to choose, I would recommend falling in love. Yes?
You've sort of been answering this through your other answers, but as a time capsule, I'm curious how you feel your film represents that time relative to today.
I think people are much more careful with their sexuality today, much more careful and intelligent about it. Now, this is speculation, but I think it's more in the context of a wider feeling about somebody. I don't think people are as promiscuous for its own sake as they were then. But as for the times we live in, I have two answers to that. I made another film called The End. I think the world is coming to an end. Really and truly. I think environmentally, among other ways, but psychologically, artificial intelligence, climate. I think we've turned corners from which there is no turning back. I used to give the world another 50 years, and now with a president, with politics in this country, threatening to turn so fascistic, God help us, I don't know what the relevance of anything is anymore.
What did I have this machinery on for? Please, don't
anything that isn't real? God.